Hey everyone. Really happy to be here. My name's Brent. I'm the founder of Umee. We're a cross-chain DeFi protocol built on Cosmos. Today we have Eric from Injective. We have Victor from Hashflow, Matt from Tapioca, as well as 0x Brainjar from Composable Finance. Do you guys want to give some introductions? Let's start with 0x Brainjar.
Sure, yeah. So I'm Brainjar, a founder and CEO of Composable. Our core focus is building orchestration infrastructure for interoperability, but also extending IBC to other ecosystems to further empower that interoperability.
Yeah, I'm Matt Marino. I'm the CEO and founder of Tapioca DAO. Basically, we're bringing lending and borrowing omni-chain with Bento and Kashi from Boring Crypto, and yeah, we're very excited.
Hey guys, I'm Victor, co-founder and CTO of Hashflow. Hashflow is a decentralized exchange that leverages market makers, institutional market makers, to prevent things like MEV attacks and sandwiches, as well as increasing the capital efficiency of DeFi trading. And recently we added cross-chain interoperability to our protocol.
Hey guys, this is Eric from Injective Labs. Injective Labs is a software development firm, core contributor to Injective, and Injective is a open, interoperable blockchain optimized for DeFi applications.
All right, as you guys can see, we have a very great panel here. Projects that are diving in the cross-chain ecosystem, folks that are looking at different sorts of DeFi use cases, and just, what are the different ways that we can use crypto in various multi-chain formats. So, cross-chain is a major topic these days. Everything's going to be multi-chain. You're not going to be siloed in one network anymore. So my first question is, I want to ask, what are the benefits of having a multi-chain system versus being siloed on just one network? What can you expect from such an architecture? Let's start with 0x Brainjar.
Yeah, so I think the main reason why protocols go multi-chain is to tap into the activity of other ecosystems. But I think what's emerging more so is everybody in this day and age essentially has positions or activity on as many chains as they're interested in. But what's hard is actually having composability between these different positions. And so what you end up having is not just fragmentation of liquidity, which is obvious, but also fragmentation of activity itself and applications themselves. And so cross-chain for me is essentially the same sort of function that DTCC plays in the equities market, which is unification not just of the markets themselves and the liquidity themselves, but unification of the actual overall markets, which further enables cohesive, seamless user experiences that are underlying that have multiple different ecosystems underlying that core sort of glue code, if you will.
Yeah, and I feel like when it comes to being able to have composable features between chains, you need to figure out the right DeFi use cases and the right ways of interoperating. I want to move the question to Eric from Injective. By the way, congrats on your recent round. Very, very wonderful news for you guys. You guys have worked with many different ecosystems. You guys had a major push to connect Cosmos with Wormhole, with the Solana ecosystem. You've also put a lot of major work into bridges like Gravity Bridge. What's sort of your strategy for adding this DeFi component into this cross-chain ecosystem?
I think when it comes to contributing for a generalized, well, relatively speaking, ecosystem, the most important aspect is to be bridge agnostic, because at the end of the day, there's different security assumptions for every single bridge solution and different types of situations where there could be compromise vectors. And the most important job of a core contributor or for any type of developers is to make sure that all the ecosystem projects and all the applications building on top have redundancy in bridging solutions, and also having the flexibility and user experience to migrate between different type of bridge assets for the same underlying. And this way, overall, during some fundamental attack incidents or some economic attacks like what we've noticed during the Terra incident, the community can immediately switch over to a different solution, or having that fundamental flexibility to be able to minimize the financial and economical impact.
Yeah, that's very important. I mean, we saw with Terra, once a major network goes down, you need to figure out all the safety measures, all the ways to mitigate these future risks, and ensure that you don't have these same vulnerabilities in the future. So I wanted to move it to Tapioca. So it sounds like you guys are working towards a multi-chain or cross-chain borrowing and lending solution. What's your perspective on some of this bridge risk? Like, cross-chain borrowing and lending is going to be awesome, but what are the ways that you guys are looking at how to address some of these bridge challenges and how to optimize some of that functionality for your product?
Yeah, no, good question. So, I mean, really, that's really the primary reason why we decided to go with Layer 0 for our solution behind how we were going to be a cross-chain money market. Essentially, when we were looking at things like, there's no intermediaries, there's no wrapped assets, things like that, and also it being trustless. Those type of things I think users are going to appreciate, especially when we just saw Nomad got hacked, we just saw Ronin, the exploit Solana wormhole. So I mean, those few things I think enable us to de-silo liquidity and allow users to borrow and lend between any chains, any number of chains that they want. So yeah.
Yeah. So these features are going to be pretty amazing once we have everything done right, once we have the best communication protocol. Let's move towards DeFi functionality. When it comes to being able to access these assets, what's the best way to obtain crypto? You either use a centralized exchange, you either use a DEX, or you might use a market maker or some sort of OTC desk. But one of the most important parts of this process is, price and execution. I wanted to move the conversation to yourself, Victor. How do you guys look at providing best execution when it comes to crypto assets on an exchange format? Like, what's your approach, strategy, and how do you optimize on some of these challenges that we see in the broader crypto world?
Sure. That's a great question. I think the one thing that I want to mention is that when AMMs kind of came out, the whole idea, the pure idea of an AMM is that it's based on supply and demand pricing, which is the most pure form of pricing that you can get in the world. However, when we think of assets in crypto, if you look at really liquid assets, you see price discovery happening on things like Binance and Coinbase and so forth. So we decided that we could take some of these market makers, work with them, and essentially build a OTC desk on chain. And in an OTC trade, you get a rate that's fixed. So we figured that if we did that, we can actually become competitive against AMMs, but also provide protection against price and guaranteed execution. Because in an AMM, pricing is determined at the time of the trade on chain within the transaction in the block, right? Whereas on Hashflow, what we do is we generate these quotes off chain prior to the trade. We show them to the trader. we have the market maker sign them cryptographically, and once they have the signature, the traders can execute them in composable ways on-chain. So settlement happens very similarly. Now, why this becomes interesting in cross-chain is because cross-chain trading on automated market makers has an extra issue of bridging time. So normally people would take one asset, say Ether on Ethereum, they would swap it over in AMM to USDC, and kind of like discarding the issues that you have with those AMM swaps, then they have to bridge the USDC over to, say, Avalanche to swap for AVAX. However, the time it takes to bridge the USDC can impact the price on the other side. Whereas the way we do it in Hashflow, because we're leveraging market makers, the general message that we send is just a message of the fixed rate. But the hedging trade on the market making side can happen as soon as the trade executes on the source chain. So we fix the problem of MEV, we pick sandwiching and so forth. We also fix the problem of price impact due to bridging time.
Yeah, as you can tell, there are a lot of components that go into this to make it done effectively, to make it done right. Cross-chain MEV, bridging time, these are all factors that go into optimizing these trading strategies. Eric, we've actually had a conversation on cross-chain MEV before. We talked about bridging between one chain and another, and just some of the aspects of these wait periods when it comes to bridges. You guys designed a powerful perpetual swap system where you're using a central limit order book as opposed to an AMM. What are your thoughts on some of on some of these aspects when it comes to optimizing on this trading between chains, cross-chain MEV, and just how you approach like a order book DEX versus a AMM style?
Yeah, cross-chain MEV is certainly extremely scary, especially as the overall ecosystem grows, especially for the IBC ecosystem grows, because then you're going to start seeing IBC transactions are transferring trade instructions and execution flows via that channel. And generally speaking, there could be delays of 15 seconds up to a few minutes, but in reality, like in terms of like centralized computers and any type of trading systems, it's a microsecond level response time. So whenever there is an observer within the source chain trying to send like a certain instruction over, that they can immediately leverage that and potentially sandwich it or potentially front run it, or from like a optimistic point of view, market makers could potentially thicken the liquidity to provide a better average execution price. So those are a huge type of like it's a giant Pandora box that we have to think very, very carefully about when it comes to sending these type of like market impacting and potentially disruptive instructions between. But if that essentially situation were to be economically or financially prevented or prohibited, then it could create a very, very strong system where you allow for a very seamless and very composable and very much atomic cross-chain financial ecosystem via any type of bridging solution.
Did you want to respond to that, Victor?
Well, I do think that that is entirely true. I think when you think of the issues that we have in AMMs today, they only refer to the mempool usually, right? And obviously it's getting more complicated with these 2.0 and so forth. With cross-chain, I think you're adding extra complexity to that layer, and to add more onto that, I think all of these protocols have to handle failure state to some extent, right? So when you're thinking of cross-chain messaging, you're not just thinking about the happy path. You're talking about what happens in a case that something doesn't work, because at the end of the day, you're talking about two different blockchains with two different states that can evolve independently. Now, as you're adding complexity to this message passing, you run into the same sort of issues where every single layer of complexity you're adding increases the ability to run MEV exponentially. because it only takes one person trying to spot out one vulnerability, right? And they can actually take advantage of the situation. And the more funds you're transferring, the bigger the opportunity. So you're going to see like, hidden kind of gains on the MEV bots. But then one large thing happens, and you understand the vulnerability once you see the crazy transaction with crazy price impact. So I think composability is really hard. I think things like running a set of instructions and kind of sending the rest of the chain over to the destination chain, that poses a lot of problems because of state management. It's doable, but my general preference when designing cross-chain protocols is trying to keep it as simple as possible and keeping things to primitive actions. So in our case, obviously, it's just a swap, right? But again, the more you add, the more ability for people to MEV, particularly when it comes to DeFi stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it's deeply apparent that whenever you're adding the component of these cross-chain features, especially with a concept like MEV, you're just adding new dimensionalities of ways that you can interact with the protocol, ways that you can take advantage of it. And composability is important. Eric mentioned IBC as a cross-chain communication protocol. We also talked a bit about layer 0. I wanted to move towards these communication protocols a bit. So 0x BrainJar, you guys are known for being able to interact with many different chains, many different networks. You're looking at adopting, protocols like IBC. Could you tell us a bit about sort of how you're architecting this type of solution? Something like how you're using XCVM. What is your approach to, best optimizing all of these cross-chain protocols?
Yeah, I mean, so I think it's interesting. Like, obviously, 3 of the projects here use IBC, and I think what's going to end up happening is like IBC has been traditionally pigeonholed into only within the Cosmos ecosystem. We're now bringing IBC to Polkadot. We're also bringing IBC to Near, and we have like a super long roadmap of many other chains to bring IBC to. So once that actually does happen, then I do feel as though there is like less room for more trusted solutions, validator-based bridges, and things that still have trusted third parties become like less and less important. I do think that like right now there's a fragmentation between like decentralization maxis who use things like IBC and people who want to basically go to market quickly, which there's nothing wrong with that, who then use trusted solutions like layer 0. And so I think for us, we are betting that IBC will be cross-ecosystem and will end up becoming like the end state of communication protocols. And with that being said, we have built XCVM, which is like cross-chain smart contracting built on CosmWasm that lets people be able to define instruction sets to then propagate these messages across multiple different ecosystems for specific cross-chain application functionality. So the intention there is for people to be able to, build multi-leg options positions across DYDX, Injective, perform swaps on Osmosis, on Pablo, RAMM, and just be able to do all these things from like one single instruction set. That is obviously like really difficult to do, but we are at a position where, because we're also utilizing CosmWasm, which was built with interoperability in mind, the framework is becoming like more and more of a reality. I think the hard part from there is like once we have the communication layer and then the infrastructure layer for cross-chain smart contracts is then the UX. So like what does the actual cross-chain application look like? And we demoed some of that at our recent event in June in Berlin. But it is a very like brand new problem space. And I think the way that like these trustless solutions and more decentralized solutions will win is by just having very simply the best user experiences, because then people will realize, okay, if you can have a fantastic user experience using IBC, then why use something more trusted? Because that's been traditionally like the argument. You go for something more centralized because the UX is better. So we're working on like all three parts of this problem, and really trying to serve as then like this infrastructure layer for like the future of people who actually want to build trustless money applications in the future, without ever having to rely on an FTX or a Sequoia to basically facilitate my cross-chain transactions.
Yeah, so as you can see, even with a base layer protocol like Composable, the end goal is really to abstract these use cases and make very usable UI UX. We want people to be able to send tokens from one chain to another within like 5 to 7 seconds type finality, and so that's kind of what we're achieving with this tech. Wanted to move it to Tapioca. It sounds like you guys have put your focus on a communication protocol like layer 0 and just focus on that side of things. What was your logic and journey like as you were selecting communication protocols to use to optimize your cross-chain functionalities? And what was your process when it came to like selecting other protocols or just looking at other ecosystems when it comes to building out this infrastructure?
Yes. So, I mean, when we first were looking at, building a cross-chain money market, the very first thing we looked at is how do we take it cross-chain. The first solutions we looked at were Axelar, CCIP, which is Chainlink, and Layer 0. Kind of the reason why we wanted to go Layer 0 is just because of the modularity, how lightweight it is. We wanted to not be on an intermediary like Axelar. We didn't want to, have to go on an IBC and then go on, kind of rely on them to get on the other networks. Whereas Layer 0, we like the idea of we're up on 7 EVM chains. As they expand out, we can expand out with proxy contracts, just lightweight contracts that don't take time to spin out infrastructure. And generally, yeah, just having instant finality, not dealing with any like wrapped assets, not burning and minting assets on either side. And we also looked at kind of the UX that Ranger was speaking about, which we like that we could do multi-collateral loans where someone could have collateral on Avalanche, collateral on ETH, and collateral on Polygon, take all three of those and simulate leverage, bridge it again. I mean, and basically take all of that and do it in a single transaction. That on a destination chain you are borrowing against all those assets in one shot. So it basically allows us to do some pretty neat stuff, keep the kind of user flow and the user experience pretty simplistic, pretty quick, so that they're out on the other end.
That makes sense. Part of it's getting the right protocol, and part of it's making it usable. Let's transition to another subject. Let's talk capital markets and macro. So as we're looking at crypto these days, we notice that it's almost impossible to ignore macro. There's a difficulty in decoupling this technology from macro forces like interest rates, inflation, the stock market, the global fixed income commodity market. And so macro is making a major play in this ecosystem, even with major OTC desks working with protocols like Solana on some of the bridges. There's no doubt that these players are making a tremendous impact in the crypto ecosystem. Eric, you guys are building a decentralized infrastructure for being able to access volatile assets in this space, and part of it is ensuring that you have major players that are able to support the protocol and ensure a healthy liquid market. What's your take on the macro aspect when it comes to groups that are going to be interacting with these DeFi protocols? How do you optimize this technological infrastructure to ensure that they have an effective ecosystem to work on? while also, interacting with, retail users and just the different user flows that go into a DeFi ecosystem?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I have to, recognize that Brent is certainly the expert on, a lot of macro environment because I believe your background is interest rate trader. So I wouldn't want to, comment too much on that because, I might be wrong on many things. But overall, like one of the most important aspects when it comes to working with institutions and working with any type of onboarding when it comes to a dynamic liquidity, expressive liquidity outlet is just how important the required return and kind of like the cost of capital is. Because essentially, if you put a capital in anywhere, whether that be AMM or whether that be a lending pool or whether that be as a single idiosyncratic order on top of an order book, it's bleeding cash for you. And then from a trader's perspective, whether that be bleeding even like a few bips per day, and that's still extremely significant for any type of high frequency traders, and also for any type of large institutions where they're managing I don't know trillions of assets hypothetically. And overall, one of the most important aspects is, especially when it comes to a network adoption and growing a network, is how do you reconcile the fact that unlike and I'm sure like most of the DeFi protocols have certainly realized this, is that capital and cost of acquiring TVL and any type of capital is not free, and you can't really kind of just plain incentivize that over time, because at the end of the day, it's not a sustainable solution. And it's really about creating this ecosystem where people can create risk-on strategies, and people can deploy on-chain automated protocols that are generating sustainable yield coming from a realistic and I would say sustainable demand, and really working with type of like this incentive system and this ecosystem of real supply and demand for capital risk, where you really blossom out as a real network or ecosystem where projects can actually find adoption that doesn't rely on like a toxic flow of incentives, and really grow sustainably that way. It might be boring initially, but certainly I think that is the right thing to do in the long run for all DeFi projects.
Go ahead.
I just want to add one thing. I think like the biggest, I do think that out of all the times in crypto where we've needed to like return to our roots of like why we're in this thing, it would be like right now, because I think governments have spent 5-6 years trying to catch up, and now they have started to just like spray and pray basically, as far as like the tornado situation that happened and like the arrests that happened today. So I do think overall like these forces that are trying to subvert the DeFi and crypto ecosystems are actually going to have a opposite effect, where like the more decentralized protocols are, the more usage there will be. And I think my thesis for like the macro environment is, as everyone starts to realize that like all these governments don't know what they're doing across not only like maintaining fiscal stability, but like maintaining like inflation, et cetera, I think there's just going to be like a massive push towards protocols that are decentralized. And I also think there will be less and less trust by the average user for like something that is kind of like institutional driven or institution controlled.
Yeah, this space is always evolving. I mean, every day there's just a new idiosyncratic thing that happens, whether it be regulatory, whether it be smart contract related, whether it be a major institution moving into this space. It's all very fascinating. Wanted to, are we good on time?
Oh, well, if you want, we can throw out to some questions that the audience have.
For sure. Yeah. Do we want to open it up for questions from the audience?
Sure. Okay. Yep. If anyone from the audience has a question, we'll just raise your hand, and a mic will come to you.
This means there's a question from the live stream. Question from Jaff for BrainJar. How does this XCVM tackle the problem of cross-chain MEV?
Yeah, so that's a great question. Basically, I think MEV, like cross-chain MEV, is like somewhat of a misnomer because the way it's going to manifest itself is going to be through things like front-running, back-running, arbitrage that's occurring on multiple different chains. And so something like XCVM, where the instruction set is defined and basically passed from chain to chain by relayers, provides now an opportunity for relayers to actually now make money in the IBC context, as opposed to before they weren't really incentivized to actually relay IBC messages. So I actually think that in some contexts, where basically validators are going to try to start having more plausible deniability, and you have sort of more people engaged in like block building on behalf of validators, this now introduces a world in which those kind of block building entities can collaborate with relayers to actually, get access to this type of information. And you may even see a world in which someone who wants to perform a sophisticated trade has the opportunity to tip all of these entities for best execution. So I think it's a really interesting design space that I've been looking at, but I think it's still very early.
That's okay. We can dive into some of these other aspects. By the way, those are really cool socks, Victor. I don't know if you guys can see.
Lens protocol.
Lens protocol socks. Those are really cool.
And I decided to mix them, so I'm wearing different colors.
Yeah, very nice. So I mean, back to the I guess the institutional adoption side. Victor, the model of Hashflow seems to really optimize bringing in the big players. Having this RFQ model seems to really appeal to, institutions that might want to get best execution for crypto assets, for being able to access this ecosystem. What's it going to take to bring the next, billions of dollars into the crypto ecosystem? What are the tools needed? What are the use cases? What are the infrastructures? What needs to happen to bring just the next global macro market cycle into this space?
It's a very interesting question because I think it's like a bit of a cycle here where first off, I do believe that institutional presence benefits retail. And the reason I believe that is because you get to build these products that have better liquidity. And I think one of the most important things in DeFi, like any sort of financial infrastructure, is to have liquidity, which is why Uniswap basically started this whole thing. Like you have tokens, and as long as your tokens are liquid, you can build all these really cool protocols, right? But the reality is that if you want to have liquid markets, you need people who ensure that those markets are liquid at every single point in time, because retail action tends to be very chaotic, right? So on the one hand, I do think that institutions need to be present, and I think they're very interested to be present as well. But on the other hand, and this kind of goes a little bit against the whole decentralization thing, but institutions, based on what I've seen, want regulated markets because they don't want to be the one that goes to jail. They don't want to be the one that gets investigated, right? Or sanctioned and so forth. So you get into this kind of interesting thing where, on the one hand, I think you need institutions to create a really good environment for retail. But on the other hand, the environment that brings institutions forward is a regulated environment, right? So this is a set of like two forces that go against each other, and I think they will converge somewhere. I don't know where, but I think what it takes to bring DeFi to real size, like to something that's comparable to TradFi, on one hand is some sort of regulation, some sort of like environment that makes people comfortable to invest billions and billions of dollars, and obviously a lot of really good and secure capital efficient protocol infrastructure, because these institutions, if the world is multi-chain, the future is multi-chain, I think multi-chain and cross-chain are a really great symbiosis. You can't have cross-chain without multi-chain because nobody wants to swap between chains, and you can't really have multi-chain without cross-chain because it becomes really capital inefficient. So really solid protocol foundations, very auditable, easy to understand, and also I think some layer of regulation that does not undermine the principles of DeFi, but also makes these players ready to come in and put in money.
Yeah, as you can see, when it comes to cross-chain and multi-chain, the liquidity flow, the trading is, basically the lifeblood of what makes this works. And when you look at DeFi, trading and borrowing and lending are kind of two sides of the same coin. They both complement each other. Matt, do you want to comment a bit on the borrowing and lending part of this equation and how it coincides with some of this trading, and how are we doing on time?
We'll just have your last question from Matt, and then one last question from the audience, and then we'll wrap up.
Thank you. Yeah, you got it, Matt.
Could you state the last part?
Yeah, so, borrowing and lending and trading, those are like two sides of the same coin, Whenever you trade, after you trade, you leverage assets, you use those borrowed assets to trade more. Where do you see something like a cross-chain borrowing and lending protocol fitting into this, liquidity provision ecosystem? Kind of like how Uniswap and Compound are really complementary products.
Yes, no. So, I mean, I just really think users need access to different financial tools like trading, like swapping, like lending to create yield for themselves. And I think basically, if you look at 2020, Ethereum was 100% dominant, essentially near 100%. Now we're going to 131 chains we have on, like DeFi Llama, for example, and Ethereum dominance is down to below 60%. So essentially, these new chains are just going to keep popping up. There's Aptos and Sui and tons of chains that are in development. I think chains are just going to keep expanding. There's users that are utilizing different chains now. It's not all Ethereum. So I think basically we just need to provide the financial tools on these chains, because as these chains come out, there's a lot of demand and there's a lot of liquidity there right off the bat, and there's always a lack of financial tooling. So I think being able to have a modular system like Tapioca, where we can pop up chain to chain to chain, kind of meets that demand, immediately, and allows us to complement tools like Hashflow and other that are here right now. I just really personally, I think cross chain's the future. So.
Great. Thanks so much. We've got we'll take one last question. If you want to, we've got one from the live stream and one here. We'll get both asked at the same time, and then we'll get one answer from the panel.
This is for Hashflow. Like, for your vision, what range of instruments are you looking at? Is this like block trading of spot, or like across options and perps and futures?
Sorry, I didn't quite hear that.
What is your vision for the range of instruments? So, or is it spot only, or futures, perps, options, et cetera, for your RFQs?
Yeah,
Just
fantastic.
talk a little bit about the platform.
Fantastic question. So another thing that I believe is going to be very important for DeFi to scale is that everyone who plays in DeFi can manage risk. And I think the way to manage risk is by having access to assets that are not just spot assets. And obviously, since our protocol is built with market makers in mind and capital efficiency in mind, we can price pretty much anything from options to ETFs to like really, really exotic structured products. So 100% everything that was mentioned. We're looking to bring a lot more of these instruments in so that we can create the infrastructure for adoption and in the end proper risk management on chain.
Question from the live stream from Yo. I recently saw an NIP from Composable to enable IBC on Near. What other ecosystems do you wish to tap into?
Polygon, Aptos, and pretty much any ecosystem that supports a light client. So Solana does not have that support. Avalanche does not have that support, but pretty much the majority of chains that matter understand that they need to implement a light client for trustless bridging. So that's kind of our intention, is to try to cover as many of these ecosystems based on like community interest.